Welcome, scholars, to Lesson 1-3.10, the end of the Crusades. This is a bonus lesson. This is not a part of your regular homework for the weekend, but I do encourage you to pay attention to this lesson, especially if you have the time over the weekend, because this is going to be my one flipped opportunity to really bring the Crusades to a close and to then look at the larger impact. Unfortunately, this will be something that we don't have as much time for in class, but I definitely wanted to give you guys an opportunity to learn a little bit about the impact of the Crusades going forward. Before we do that, some quick overview. Crusades in summary. The Crusades were first called in 1095 and lasted until the end of the 1200s. So they ran roughly 200 years. They were primarily fought for religious purposes. But as we've seen through some of our documents and through some of our examination in class, there were other reasons as well. We saw that calling crusades was very good politically and financially for the church. This is why later popes, after Pope Urban II, called them with such regularity. It's a way for them to expand their power and increase their wealth. So there was not just the religious motive there. Additionally, for feudal lords, particularly those who were not in line to inherit a lot, running a crusade or following the crusade out into the east, into the Holy Land, was a great way for those lords that were not going to inherit the manor to get land, to get a city of their own, or perhaps even a principality of their own. This was a very good way for those younger sons, the unlanded nobility, to get in on this game. So there were those other causes, those other reasons as well. So let's keep that in mind. This was not purely a religious fight, although it was mostly. Now we've got the later Crusades. Really, we're talking about with the later Crusades pretty much everything after the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade was a colossal failure in that the entire objective of going to the Holy Lands was thrown aside for greed, and it really just became apparent to many at that time, though not all, that the whole concept of crusading had become corrupt. This would be in 1202. Keep in mind, they keep going for another 70 years. But once people are no longer as, keen to do this for the religious purpose, we start to see it as more a corrupting influence. The enthusiasm goes down, and Crusader kings are no longer able to raise the large armies required to take over and hold large areas of land. They will certainly try, and there are some successes in those later crusades, but we see increasingly a large number of failures and crusaders not quite having the armies that they need, and showing up, fighting a single battle, and then putting themselves in a position where they needed to submit to the Islamic rulers. So those last crusades, the last 70 years of crusading outside of Europe, not a lot of successes. The Crusader kingdoms all fall during that time. A couple of them have fallen even before the Fourth Crusade. And so we've got, setback after setback after setback. And Europeans, once they're no longer as united in going forth and winning these crusades, they start to turn back to, their centuries-old tradition of fighting each other. So European conflicts once again become mostly internal after the Crusades. That does not mean that 200 years of Christian presence in the Holy Land is just going to disappear and become insignificant. That just doesn't happen. In the late period of the Crusades, the Ottoman Empire rises up. We're going to talk a lot about the Ottomans. We're going to have 20, 30 lessons on the Ottomans. So I won't go into this in great detail now, but when the Ottoman Empire moves in, takes over the Holy Land, many of the Frankish Christians do remain. It's not as though every last one of them is uprooted and removed from the land. We do have a lot of Frankish Christians that remain, Levantines they are called. So the Levantines are there, those who lived in the Levant, Levantines. And a large number of those Christians remain today. In modern Turkey, there is a sizable Christian population. This would be the seat of the Ottoman Empire. And then also in Lebanon, a nation that is next to Syria, north of modern Israel, there's a substantial Christian population in that nation as well. This really derives its root from, the Byzantine Empire and their expansion of the region, but also maintained and reinforced by the Crusader states that existed along this coastline for 200 years. That doesn't just simply go away. Now, moving out of the crusading era, the nature of the Crusades and their self-definition as a religious conflict has shaped this East-West relationship ever since. The East and the West, Muslims and Christians, have never really gotten over the Crusades. We both, Christians and Muslims, look at each other through the lens, this historical lens of the Crusade, either through cultural practices or explicit teachings. There's kind of this underlying mistrust because of such a long and vicious period of warfare. And the memory of Crusades is it's there, it's alive, it lives in that region today. And it doesn't help, really doesn't help, when you have, modern military uniforms that sometimes include patches that resemble those worn by Crusaders. It says very explicitly that religion is still a part of the conflicts of the region. And we can see that today. There's a lot of friction between Christians and Muslims going on in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt today. All these groups are still in friction and in conflict. Probably the most dramatic experience of that right now is with the ISIS group, that is the Islamic State in Syria. Another name for it is the Islamic State in the Levant, ISIL. President Obama uses that name for it quite a bit. And again, we're talking about the Islamic State in the Levant. Remember the Levantines. The Levantines are those Frankish Christians that remained behind. So we're talking about that same region, and ISIL is targeting a lot of those Christians. Again, this is tying all back to this ancient conflict between Islam and Christianity. Modern impact of this. I think we just covered some of the modern impact with ISIL, actually more modern than this slide. But it's, good to know this really does impact modern politics. Western interference in Mideast affairs always draws this criticism that it's a new crusade. It does not help when every now and again a Western politician is foolish enough to use the term crusade to describe what we're doing, which some US politicians not too long ago actually did. That is just a great way to motivate the people to fight against anything the West is trying to do in the region. Call it a crusade. Mention the Crusades. Make it possible for them to think it's somehow connected to Crusades. And they will rise up and defend themselves because the West was brutal during the Crusades. Now, an example of this, not one where we use the term crusade, but was when the United States sent troops to Saudi Arabia in the 1990s. This was during the early 1990s, during the Iraq War, the very first one. We called that the Persian Gulf War. And we went to Saudi Arabia to help defend the Saudis in case the Iraqis should attack. Now, Saudi Arabia is the homeland of Mecca and Medina, the two most holy sites in Islam, and a group of extremists within the Islamic faith, this was not mainstream, but a group of extremists saw this as Western crusaders entering the Holy Land. And there was a very violent reaction to that. We saw that violent reaction really take hold on September 11th, 2001. The September 11th terrorist attacks were in their way connected to this idea of crusades, that the West was still interfering in the East, the West was still conducting a crusade, that this particular group felt that this was inappropriate and that they needed to take the fight to America, and they attacked. That is a very real interpretation of how the Crusades continue to impact the world today. The memory of the Crusades is toxic, and it still causes a lot of violence and violent reactions in the world today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you stuck to the very end. Please complete the entry ticket on Google Classroom, and I will make sure that you are credited for going above and beyond. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you in school on Monday.